There was a strange hum in the kitchen that night. I remember it clearly because it was the only sound I could hear besides the ticking of the old wooden clock above the fridge. The ice machine was still running, clinking cubes every few minutes into the empty bin like it didn't realize the drinks had stopped hours ago. My name's Lowell. Not a name you hear every day. My wife's name is Darcy. We've been married for 9 years and 1 month. I counted. I always count things like that: anniversaries, the number of birthday cards we mailed her mom, how many times we repainted the guest room. I'm not a control freak. I'm just someone who remembers. That night, Darcy said she'd be out late. Just drinks with Haley and Monica, she said, at that little bar on Seacrest Avenue with the pool table and the karaoke machine. She kissed my cheek, not the lips. Didn't touch her wine. Wore a jacket I hadn't seen in a year and perfume I hadn't smelled since our trip to Austin. I should have known then. Or maybe I did. But I didn't say anything. I always told myself not to be the jealous husband. Not to be that guy, the one who tracks his wife's phone or checks her browser history. Darcy made fun of people like that. Called it insecurity. I wanted to be her version of a good man. She left around 8:30 p.m. By 10 p.m. I had already finished folding the laundry and was halfway through a lukewarm bowl of instant noodles. I stared at the kitchen light bulb and wondered if it had always flickered like that. I texted her. All good. No answer. I refreshed the weather app. Rain was coming. Checked her location, disabled. Again. Odd. She usually kept it on when she went out. She said it was for safety. But that night, it wasn't. At 12:43 a.m. I saw the lights of a car outside and rushed to the window. But it wasn't her. Just our neighbor's son coming back from a party. I sat back down, and that's when the ice machine made another loud crash. It startled me so much I spilled tea on my socks. I remember staring at those wet socks and suddenly thinking, she's not coming home tonight. And I didn't even know why. I didn't know there was a man named Connor, a bartender she'd met 2 months ago. I didn't know they'd been texting on a separate app, one she downloaded and hid in a folder labeled budget. I didn't know she had plans that went beyond karaoke. But I felt it. Right there, sitting alone in a kitchen that still smelled like lemon cleaner and anxiety. The kind of anxiety that creeps in when someone pulls away slowly, like tide from the shore. I didn't sleep. Not even a little. I watched the door like it might turn into something else, like maybe it would become a portal back to the version of our life that made sense. Darcy walked in at 6:04 a.m. No shoes. Hair pulled back like she'd just gotten out of a car with windows down. Her eyeliner was smeared. Her voice was hoarse when she said, "Morning." No explanation. No, sorry, I didn't text. Not even a glance at me. She went straight to the bathroom, then into the bedroom and shut the door. And I stood there. Still. Frozen. Not angry. Not yelling. Just quietly broken in a way I couldn't describe, not even now. I didn't confront her. I didn't accuse. I didn't cry. I just knew. That night she stayed at the bar. But the next morning she didn't know it yet, but she'd lost something far more permanent than her earrings. She'd lost me. The hours after she walked in were heavier than silence. I could hear the sound of the faucet dripping in the bathroom, the low groan of the floorboards under her steps, the rustle of her clothes as she peeled them off. But she didn't speak. Didn't explain. She just moved around the house like I wasn't even there. Like I was invisible. And maybe I was. Maybe I had been for a long time. She fell asleep almost instantly. I could hear her breathing shift through the wall between the bedroom and the guest room, where I had ended up lying on top of a cold blanket, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. I didn't even take off my watch. I remember the way the band dug into my wrist, but I didn't move. I didn't care. My body was still. My mind wasn't. It was racing, connecting dots I didn't want to admit were part of the same picture. I kept thinking about the way she avoided my eyes. How she smelled like unfamiliar cologne. The missing wedding ring she usually wore on her thumb, now gone. I thought about the bracelet again. Too big for her. Too masculine. Something someone gave her in a moment that wasn't supposed to leave the night behind. I didn't sleep. And when she finally woke up around 11 a.m., she came into the kitchen in one of my old t-shirts like nothing had happened. Her hair still damp from a shower. She didn't mention the night before. She didn't mention that she hadn't texted me once. She just poured herself coffee and said, "What are we doing for dinner tonight?" Dinner. Not even a sorry. I looked at her, and for the first time in 9 years, I didn't recognize the person standing in front of me. It was her face, her voice, her laugh, but something inside her had been replaced. Worn down, maybe, or swapped out completely. I didn't tell her I knew. That was the first step. because part of me wanted to understand how it got this far. Not just that she had stayed out all night and came home drenched in someone else's cologne, but why I wasn't even worth an apology. I played it cool. Asked how her night was. She blinked like I'd asked her what 2 plus 2 was. Simple, but she couldn't answer. Oh, you know, she said. Long Haley got into it with some guy, and Monica's ex showed up. Drama. She laughed. You didn't miss anything. But I had. I had missed everything. Every whisper. Every eye contact that lasted too long. Every lie she rehearsed before coming home. I missed the point where I stopped being her priority. Later that afternoon, I stepped outside under the excuse of checking the gutters. I wasn't. I just needed air. I needed distance. And that's when I did something I'd never done before. I called her cousin Jules. Darcy hated Jules. Said she was nosy and judgmental. But Jules had been the only one who ever told me, flat out, Lowell, your wife isn't the angel she pretends to be. Jules picked up on the first ring. I didn't even get 3 words out before she said, she was with him again last night. Wasn't she? I said nothing. My silence answered for me. Jules sighed. His name's Connor. Bartender at a place downtown. They've been talking for weeks. She thinks she's being slick, but it's all over her face. You deserve to know. I asked how long. She said, since that fight you two had over New Year's. She said you were boring. Too passive. She said she wanted to feel alive again. Alive. Like our quiet dinners, our road trips, the time I surprised her with her favorite record on vinyl didn't count as life. Like stability was some kind of prison. I thanked Jules. I hung up, and I sat on the porch for what felt like an hour. That night, Darcy ordered pizza like nothing had happened. She kissed my cheek again. Laughed at a show she wasn't really watching. Checked her phone every few minutes and tilted the screen away from me like I hadn't already figured it out. She went to bed early. I stayed in the living room again. And I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't break things. But I made a decision. She had no idea that what she'd lost wasn't in that bar. It was here. And it was leaving soon. The next morning started like all the others, but everything had changed. She didn't know it. But I had already begun to disappear. Not physically, not yet. But emotionally, mentally, I was already halfway out the door. She came into the kitchen in that same old t-shirt of mine, yawning like she hadn't shattered something sacred just hours ago. The way she smiled at me, made a dumb joke about how cold the floor was, poured her coffee like nothing was off. It was insulting in a way that felt like a punch delivered with a whisper. I watched her sit across from me at the kitchen table like we were still us. She scrolled through her phone, thumb twitching like she was waiting on a message. And it hit me she probably was. From him, the bartender. The guy with the leather bracelet and the smirk I hadn't even seen but already hated. A man I didn't know had already stolen pieces of the woman I married. While I sat quietly folding laundry and believing in the story we used to be. She asked if I could take the trash out before work. I nodded. That was all I gave her. Not because I was mad. Anger would have meant I was still invested. But because I didn't want to give her any more of me than she'd already taken for granted. I took the trash out, and as I stood in the driveway tying the bag, something inside me just broke in a quiet, unceremonious way. Not like in movies where the music swells and someone drops to their knees. This was just acceptance. The cold realization that I wasn't enough for her anymore, and maybe hadn't been for a while. At work, I barely got anything done. I stared at my monitor, read the same email 3 times, and couldn't tell you what it said. All I could think about was how calm she looked that morning. How she hadn't apologized, hadn't explained, hadn't even lied well. She simply existed in the space between betrayal and denial, hoping I wouldn't notice the smell of someone else's world still clinging to her skin. I didn't tell anyone at work what was going on. I didn't want sympathy. I didn't want advice. What I wanted was clarity, and maybe a little bit of courage. So on my lunch break, I drove to that bar. The one on Seacrest Avenue. I didn't go inside. I sat across the street in my car, windows down, engine off. I just watched. Watched the neon sign flicker. Watched people come and go. I wasn't looking for her. I wasn't trying to catch anything. I just needed to see the place for what it was, a symbol of everything she'd rather do than be home. A place where she laughed without me, where she forgot I existed, where she flirted and danced and disappeared into a version of herself I didn't recognize. And I realized something that hurt more than anything. She wasn't sorry. She hadn't apologized because she didn't think she'd done anything wrong. She thought I'd never leave because I never raised my voice. That night I made dinner. Pasta. Her favorite. I even lit candles. She looked at me like I was crazy and asked what the occasion was. I said, just felt like it. She smiled. Ate. Told me about Monica's dog and how it bit a delivery guy. She didn't notice that I didn't touch my food. Or maybe she did and she just didn't care. After dinner, she went to the bedroom. I heard her laugh through the door, texting him, maybe. Or someone else. I wouldn't put it past her anymore. She didn't come out to say goodnight. I didn't expect her to. Instead, I stayed in the kitchen. Washed the dishes. Dried each one like I was polishing away the years. Then I went into the garage. I pulled down the old suitcase from the top shelf. The one we used when we went to New Orleans. The zipper still had a Mardi Gras bead stuck in it. She laughed so hard that Trip spilled daiquiri all over the hotel bed. I stood there holding it, remembering, and felt something deep inside me go numb. I packed what I needed. Just the basics. A few shirts, jeans, my charger, and the old journal I hadn't written in for years. She was asleep by the time I zipped it shut. And I stood there in the hallway looking at the bedroom door like it was a gate to a life I couldn't stay in anymore. Still, I didn't leave. Not that night. Not yet. But the version of me who loved her without conditions, who believed in her without hesitation, that version? He left long ago. The next morning she woke up humming. I could hear her voice drifting down the hallway while she padded barefoot across the floor, completely unaware that the man she thought she married was no longer sitting at that table waiting for her approval. She made eggs and toast like we were in a cozy little sitcom, as if last Friday night hadn't happened, as if she didn't come home at sunrise reeking of another man's cologne with someone else's bracelet dangling off her wrist. She poured 2 cups of coffee, set one down in front of me, and kissed the top of my head like I was still hers. I wanted to scream. Not out of rage, but out of disbelief. Disbelief at how easily she could switch it off. How cleanly she could compartmentalize betrayal, fold it into the corner of her mind like a receipt she didn't need anymore. Meanwhile, I sat there, holding a mug I didn't want, forcing myself not to visibly shake from the weight of everything I had now confirmed. She asked me if I could look at the sink later, said the drain was backing up. I nodded. I always nodded. That was my role in this marriage, wasn't it? Say yes. Fix things. Take out the trash. Pay the bills. Pretend I didn't notice her silence on Tuesday nights and her suddenly new interest in being spontaneous on weekends. I used to think being agreeable made me strong. Now I realized it just made me easy to ignore. I told her I had errands to run and left the house with my half-packed suitcase in the trunk. I wasn't running away. Not yet. But I needed to breathe somewhere that didn't smell like her lies. I drove aimlessly at first, through neighborhoods we used to walk before dinner, past the bookstore she used to drag me into back when she cared about the little things. I ended up at the pier. Same place I proposed to her almost 10 years ago. I sat there on a bench, watching strangers walk by, and I finally opened the journal I'd packed. The last entry was from 2017. A note about how nervous I was to start a new job and how lucky I felt to have Darcy by my side. The optimism in those words hit me harder than I expected. That version of me was dead now. He didn't know what I knew. He didn't see what I saw. I started writing again. Not poetry, not paragraphs, just one sentence. She doesn't love you anymore. She just likes the way you hold the pieces together. That sentence sat on the page like a verdict. No exaggeration. No drama. Just truth. Raw and simple. My phone buzzed. It was her. Want me to start dinner? I stared at the screen for a long time. The words were so normal. That's what stung the most. She was going through the motions, running our marriage like it was a script she didn't even believe in anymore. I didn't answer. I drove back but parked 2 blocks away and walked the rest of the distance. I needed to see the house from a different angle. To remind myself that I didn't have to live behind those walls if I didn't want to. When I came in through the back door, she was in the living room, feet up on the couch, watching a show and laughing too loud. Her phone lit up on the armrest. She didn't notice me at first, and I watched her reach for the screen and glance at it like she was checking for a pulse. Her smile was real in a way I hadn't seen in months. But not for me. She didn't even ask where I'd been. Didn't ask about the errands. Didn't ask if I was okay. She just leaned over, kissed my cheek again, and said, "Hey, I was thinking we should take a weekend trip. Just us. You know, reconnect." I stared at her. Reconnect? She wanted to take a break from cheating on me. To remind herself why she married me? I asked her where she wanted to go. She shrugged. "Somewhere quiet. You pick." I nodded again. Of course I did. That's what I do. I nod. I agree. Pick. I plan. I pretend. She smiled, satisfied with the illusion. Then she went back to her show. And I sat across from her wondering what kind of person needs to be loved by two people just to feel whole. The plan started forming that night. Quietly, carefully, not out of revenge, not out of hate, but because sometimes the cleanest thing a person can do is leave without warning. Because when someone crosses a line and never turns around to see if you followed, they don't deserve to know when you stopped walking. She didn't know yet, but the next time she stayed out late, I wasn't going to be there when she came back. And she'd feel it. Not in that moment, but in the one after. It was a Thursday when it happened. She came into the kitchen wearing her tight jeans, the ones she hadn't worn in over a year, and that new top I'd never seen before. Hair done, eyeliner sharper than usual. She looked radiant, and not in the way someone does for their husband. No, this kind of radiant had purpose. It had an audience in mind. I asked where she was off to. Calm, measured. The way someone asks about the weather, knowing full well it's about to storm. She smiled, didn't meet my eyes. "Just Haley again. Girls' night. You know." I nodded. "Same place." "Probably," she said, grabbing her keys, slipping on her boots. "Don't wait up. We might go late." That was the cue. The same line she'd used the night she didn't come home. Only this time I didn't feel panic. I didn't feel betrayal. I felt something clearer, like I had finally gotten to the center of the maze. I wasn't lost anymore. I watched her through the blinds as she got into her car. Watched the taillights fade at the end of the street. And that was it. No big fight. No tearful confrontation. No, how could you? Just silence. I turned back toward the house, and I swear it didn't even feel like my home anymore. Everything inside was hers. The plants, the throw pillows, the abstract art she swore gave the place character. I had been living in her world for years, decorating it, funding it, protecting it, but I wasn't part of it. I didn't pack a suitcase that night. I didn't need to. Everything that mattered could fit in a single backpack. My wallet, laptop, chargers, a couple changes of clothes, my journal, and a single photo. Us at a fair in 2016. The last time I remember feeling completely chosen by her. The rest? She could keep it. The matching wine glasses. The throw blanket we picked out at that overpriced boutique. The life she curated to make it look like we were happy. She could have all of it. I left the lights on when I walked out. Locked the front door behind me. Dropped the key in the mailbox. And drove. Nowhere in particular. Just away. I ended up in a roadside motel 3 towns over. It was cheap, smelled like old fabric and cleaner, but I didn't care. The bed was stiff. The ceiling had a crack that ran like a river across the paint. But it was mine. For the first time in years, a space that was mine. And still, I didn't cry. I thought I might. But instead, I sat at the desk and opened my journal again. She stayed at the bar. I stayed gone. That's all I wrote. That night, I didn't check her location. I didn't wonder who she was texting. I didn't replay conversations or wonder what I could have done differently. I let it all go. At 2:19 a.m., my phone buzzed. A message from her. "Still up." I didn't answer. 10 minutes later. "Are you mad?" Then, "I'll be home soon. Wait up." And finally, Lowell. That one hit harder than the rest. Not because it showed care, but because she didn't know yet that I was already gone. She thought she had time. Thought this was just another cold night in a quiet house where she could slide back into bed at sunrise and pretend things were fine. But that was the night I stopped playing the role she cast me in. And I didn't give her the satisfaction of a goodbye. She came home to silence. I imagine it now. The exact moment she opened the door and realized something was off. The lights were still on. The living room was untouched. Exactly the way she left it. But the energy was different. Still. Hollow. like the air had changed weight, like a presence was missing, and the walls hadn't caught up yet. My shoes weren't by the door. My jacket wasn't on the hook. No coffee in the pot. No sound of the faucet dripping in the kitchen, because I fixed it the day before I left. One last gift. She probably walked through the house slowly at first, confused more than concerned. Maybe she thought I went for a walk. Maybe I had fallen asleep on the guest bed again. Maybe I was being dramatic. But then she must have opened the closet and seen the empty hangers. The space where my duffel bag used to be. My toothbrush gone. The drawer where I kept my watch, left wide open like an unanswered question. That was when it must have hit her. I wasn't coming back. By the time she picked up the phone to call me, I was already hundreds of miles away, driving along the coast with the windows cracked and the radio off. I didn't want noise. I wanted wind, space, the slow hum of a world that kept moving while mine had been stuck in the same loop for far too long. Her first call came in just after 7 a.m. I ignored it. Then a text. "Where are you?" 10 minutes later. "Lowell, what the hell?" I didn't respond. I didn't want her to hear my voice. I didn't want to offer comfort in the form of a reply. She'd offered me none. The texts kept coming. "Can you at least tell me what this is? If this is about last week. Lowell, talk to me, please." And finally, "Are you okay?" That one gave me pause, because buried under all the performance, there was a flicker of truth, a moment of fear, not for me, not really, but for the collapse of the life she thought she had under control. She assumed I'd never leave because I never raised my voice, never made demands, never made her uncomfortable. She mistook my silence for weakness, but silence can be a weapon too. And now she was bleeding from the wound she never saw coming. I parked near a lake that afternoon and just sat there for hours, watching the still water, watching kids toss stones, watching time move forward without needing anyone's permission. I wondered when exactly our marriage died. Was it the first lie she told about a late meeting? The first time she flirted with a stranger when I wasn't around? Or had it died even before that, quietly, when I stopped being the man she wanted and became the man she tolerated? I pulled out my journal and started writing again. "You never said it, Darcy. But you missed him when he wasn't even real yet. Because that's the truth of it, isn't it? She had fallen for a version of herself she couldn't be with me. And I spent too many years trying to hold on to someone who had already let go." I checked into a new place that evening. A quiet inn tucked behind a row of tall pines. No TV, no Wi-Fi, just peace. The kind of peace you don't earn by running, but by surviving. Her final text of the day came at 10:41 p.m. "You can't just vanish, Lowell. You can't do this." I wanted to reply. I didn't vanish. I unraveled. You just never looked close enough to see it. But I didn't send anything. She needed to sit in the silence now. Let it fill the rooms I once filled. Let it echo through the house with every unanswered call, every unreturned text, every plate she sets on the table alone. That night, I fell asleep without checking the time. And for the first time in months, I didn't dream about her. The calls got longer, the voicemails more frantic, and the texts, they started changing tone. In the beginning, it was curiosity, then panic, then guilt. But now she was angry. That's how I knew the reality had sunk in. It wasn't just about me being gone, it was about the control being gone. She couldn't manage the silence, couldn't manage the story. She had been building this careful narrative in her head, where she was still the victim of a cold, distant husband who never paid attention. And now that husband had taken the one thing she never thought he would, his absence. I woke up that morning to 5 missed calls and a string of texts that read like someone spiraling down a flight of stairs they thought they built themselves. "Lowell, I'm serious. You're scaring me. Are you punishing me? For what? We're adults, we can talk. What happened to you? This is cruel, Lowell. Lowell Thomas Everett. Answer your phone." She had never used my full name like that. It read cold, formal, like I was a stranger now. And maybe I was. She had spent so much time trying to reshape me into someone she could control that she didn't notice she'd erased the version of me she married. And now that he was gone, she was finally looking for him. But too late. I didn't write back. I didn't block her either. I wanted her to sit with every word she sent, to stare at the delivered notification with the same dread I used to feel when she wouldn't answer mine. I checked out of the inn and headed west. I didn't have a destination, I just knew I didn't want to be anywhere we had shared. Not the towns we'd passed through on road trips. Not the hotels we laughed in. Not the restaurants where I memorized the way she held her wine glass when she was nervous. I wanted blank space. I wanted towns where my name didn't mean anything. Where I didn't have to be Darcy's husband or Lowell, the quiet one. By the third day of being gone, she finally mentioned his name. Not to confess, no. To justify. I told you it wasn't serious, she wrote. You're being dramatic. I was lonely. You were always so distant. I needed something. And I thought you'd understand eventually. That was the part that twisted like glass in my chest. I thought you'd understand eventually. Like I was supposed to give her permission to break us apart. Like I was supposed to hold her hand through the process of replacing me. I pulled over at a diner off Route 17 and sat in the back booth, letting the scent of burnt coffee and fried eggs calm me down. There was an older man at the counter wearing a cap that said retired but not dead, and he kept glancing at the door like someone was late. Something about him made me ache. The waitress brought my order pancakes, bacon, and black coffee and asked if I was just passing through. I nodded. She smiled. You've got that look? What look? I asked. She shrugged. Like you finally walked away from something you should have left a long time ago. I didn't say a word. Just looked down at my plate. But inside, something gave way. Because she was right. She saw through me without knowing anything. And that made me realize maybe I wasn't invisible after all. Maybe I had just been looking for the wrong kind of witness. That night, I found a small cabin rental online. Quiet. Remote. No reception. I booked it for 3 weeks without thinking twice. I needed time. Not to heal, not yet. But to stop shaking from the aftershock of being discarded like I was a placeholder in someone else's story. Before I turned my phone off, one last message came in from Darcy. You don't just disappear on your wife. That's not who you are. You're better than this. I stared at those words for a long time. And then I whispered out loud to no one. No, Darcy. You're thinking of the man I used to be. I powered off the phone. And finally, the noise died. The first few days in the cabin were filled with silence so complete it almost hurt. At first, it felt unnatural waking up without the hum of her hairdryer through the wall, no clinking of mugs, no half-hearted "love you" mumbled as she rushed out the door. But slowly, I started to realize how much noise I had lived with. Not the kind you hear, but the kind you carry. The anxiety of waiting for the next excuse. The ache of wondering if I was still enough. The exhaustion of pretending I didn't know the truth. That weight, it started to lift. Each morning, I brewed my coffee without checking my phone. I walked down to the lake, journal in hand, and just sat. Wrote. Thought. Watched birds skim the surface of the water like they had nowhere else to be. I was still angry. Still sad. But underneath all that, something better began to take shape. Peace. Real peace. The kind I hadn't felt in years. I started cooking again. Reading. Remembering what I actually liked when no one was watching. I called my brother, hadn't spoken to him in months. He picked up and said, you sound different. I told him the truth. He didn't say, I told you so. He just said, about damn time. The third week, I finally turned my phone back on. 58 missed calls. Dozens of voicemails. Long texts, short texts, angry texts, sad texts. Her voice, at one point, shaking with tears. Lowell, I made a mistake. I panicked. I thought I needed more, but I didn't know what I had. Please come home. But it wasn't home anymore. Not for me. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because closure wasn't a conversation anymore, it was the quiet, firm decision to live a better life without asking for permission. And that life started one morning when I walked into the little town nearby and saw a bookstore tucked between a florist and a bakery. It reminded me of who I used to be. I stepped inside and met someone, a woman named Marin, who ran the place on her own. She asked me what I liked to read. I said I hadn't figured that out yet. She smiled and said, then let's find out. We talked. Not like people filling space, but like people who actually wanted to listen. She didn't ask why I looked tired. She just offered me a cup of tea and a corner seat. Over the next few weeks, I came in more often. She recommended books. I left post-it notes in them with quotes I liked. We never rushed it. Never labeled it. But something new was building, slow, honest, and light. So light. I still think about Darcy sometimes. Not with hatred. Not even pain. Just distance. She stayed at the bar that night, thinking she could have both lives. That she could run from herself and still keep the man who waited for her. But I wasn't waiting anymore. Because when she crossed that line, she lost me. And when I walked away, I finally found myself. I'm not bitter. I'm not broken. I'm just free. And that's the ending I never knew I needed. Lowell.